For nearly 20 years, Priscilla Presley said almost nothing. She attended the funerals, managed the estate, smiled on red carpets, and let the world remember Elvis exactly the way it wanted to. The golden voice, the leather jumpsuit, the king who died too young. But then she wrote a book, and then she wrote another one. And what came out of those pages shattered the image that millions of fans had spent decades worshiping. Controlling behavior behind closed doors at Graceland, affairs with co-stars that he denied to her face, a final encounter so violent she called it the worst memory of their intimacy, and a power imbalance that started when she was 14 years old, and he was the most famous man on the planet. So why did Priscilla wait so long to tell the truth? And what exactly did she reveal? To understand why her words carried the weight of a confession, you need to go back to the beginning, to a military base in Wiesbaden, West Germany in 1959, where a teenager named Priscilla Presley heard the name Elvis Presley for the first time. She was the stepdaughter of an Air Force officer named Joseph Presley. Her biological father, a Navy pilot named James Wagner, died in a plane crash when she was still an infant. The family moved constantly, from base to base, and from country to country. By the time they landed in Germany, Priscilla was a shy, well-mannered 14-year-old with no idea that her life was about to change permanently. Elvis was 24, already the biggest recording artist alive, and stationed in Germany for his military service. A mutual acquaintance named Cary Grant introduced them at a party, and something clicked, not as equals. That distinction matters. She was a ninth grader. He was a global phenomenon with an entourage, a mansion back in Memphis, and a reputation that preceded him everywhere. But Elvis saw something in her that he claimed he could not find in Hollywood actresses or Nashville singers. Innocence, purity, a blank canvas he could shape into his ideal companion. And that shaping began almost immediately. This is where the first crack in the fairy tale appears. Years before the marriage, years before the divorce, years before the revelations. Because what Elvis called love, Priscilla would later describe as something far more complicated. He chose her clothes. He styled her hair into the towering black bouffant that became her signature. He taught her how to apply the dark, dramatic eye makeup that mirrored his own aesthetic. And when she could not keep up with his nocturnal lifestyle, staying awake until dawn and sleeping through the day, he introduced her to amphetamines and sleeping pills. She was still a teenager. Her parents allowed her to move to Memphis in 1963, 2 months before her 18th birthday. The arrangement was that she would live with Elvis's father and stepmother and attend a local Catholic school. But Priscilla gradually moved into Graceland itself, and the lines between courtship and captivity blurred until they were nearly invisible. Elvis was often away filming movies in Hollywood, and he insisted Priscilla stay behind in Memphis. She waited for him in Graceland, isolated from friends, surrounded by his entourage, reading tabloid reports about his relationships with co-stars. When she asked questions, he told her she was imagining things. When she pushed harder, he threatened to send her back to her parents. She would later describe these tactics as a deliberate method of keeping her under control. But at the time, she accepted them. She loved him, and she believed that loving him meant becoming whoever he needed her to be. They married on May 1st, 1967, in a small Las Vegas ceremony. She was 21, he was 32. Their daughter, Lisa Marie, was born exactly 9 months later. The birth of their child triggered something in Elvis that Priscilla never saw coming. He stopped being intimate with her. According to her memoir, Elvis told her he had never been able to make love to a woman who had a child. His deeply conservative upbringing and idealized views of motherhood created a wall between them that she could not climb. She had waited years for the physical side of their relationship to fully begin, and now, months into motherhood, it was effectively over. That rejection cut deep. But it wasn't the only wound. The affairs had been a constant undercurrent throughout their marriage. The most devastating was his relationship with actress Anne Margaret during the filming of Viva Las Vegas in 1963. Elvis denied it at first, but when Anne Margaret publicly announced their engagement to the press, the lie collapsed. Elvis sent Priscilla back to Memphis and told her to wait until the situation calmed down. She threw a vase across the room in frustration, but she went anyway. She always went. That pattern, resist then comply, became the architecture of their marriage. Elvis would cheat, deny, rage when confronted, threaten to end things, then pull her back in with tenderness and promises. Priscilla would find cards from other women tucked into his belongings. She would see newspaper stories about on-set romances. She would change her own appearance, copying the look of whichever woman she suspected he was seeing, hoping it would win back his attention. She did this for years. Think about that for a second. One of the most photographed women in America spent her private life trying to look like other women just to hold on to her own husband. But Priscilla was not passive forever. Something inside her started to shift in the late 1960s. Elvis had become consumed by spiritualism and prescription medications. His career was stalling as the Beatles dominated the charts. He was restless, paranoid, and increasingly unpredictable. She watched the man she had built her entire identity around begin to unravel, and she realized she had no identity of her own to fall back on. She started taking karate lessons. It was supposed to be a hobby, something to fill the long hours at Graceland while Elvis was on tour. But in her instructor, a man named Mike Stone, she found something she had not felt in years. Attention that did not come with conditions. Respect that did not require her to perform a role. By 1972, their relationship had become romantic, and Priscilla made the hardest decision of her life. She told Elvis she was leaving. His reaction was exactly what anyone who understood their dynamic would have predicted. He was furious. He was devastated. And according to Priscilla's memoir, their final intimate encounter was not consensual. She described it as Elvis forcing himself on her in a display of dominance. She later softened the language in interviews, calling her original description an overstatement. But the incident remained, in her own words, the most painful memory of their physical relationship. They separated in February 1972 and divorced on October 9, 1973. The proceedings were surprisingly civil. They held hands walking out of the courthouse. They agreed to share custody of Lisa Marie. And despite everything, Priscilla bought a house near Elvis's home in Beverly Hills so their daughter could move easily between both parents. She still loved him. That's the part that makes this story so much more complex than a simple tale of a woman escaping a bad marriage. She didn't leave because the love was gone. She left because the life was killing her. Elvis, meanwhile, spiraled. His concert schedule was grueling, sometimes 60 shows in a single year. His dependence on prescription drugs escalated dramatically. His personal physician would later face criminal charges after it was revealed he had prescribed over 19,000 doses of narcotics, sedatives, and stimulants to Elvis in the 31 months before his death. By 1977, journalists described him as a grotesque caricature of his former self, sluggish, slurring his words on stage, forgetting lyrics. On August 16, 1977, just 4 years after the divorce, his fiancée Ginger Alden found him unresponsive on the bathroom floor at Graceland. He was 42 years old. Priscilla received a personal call from Graceland before the public announcement was made. She flew to Memphis on Elvis's private plane, the Lisa Marie, and sat alone behind closed doors, remembering everything. The joy, the pain, the contradictions of loving someone who could be both the most magnetic person in any room and the most destructive force in her private life. But what happened next is what separates Priscilla's story from every other celebrity divorce narrative. She didn't disappear. She didn't sell her story to the tabloids. She took control. When Elvis's father Vernon died in 1979, Priscilla became the executor of Elvis's estate. What she inherited was a financial disaster. Graceland cost $500,000 a year in upkeep. Lisa Marie's inheritance had dwindled to barely $1 million. Taxes and debts were piling up. The estate was weeks away from having to sell the mansion. Priscilla hired a chief executive officer named Jack Soden, opened Graceland to the public in 1982, and within 4 weeks the estate had recovered its entire investment. She built Elvis Presley Enterprises into a business generating tens of millions of dollars annually. By the time Lisa Marie took control of her inheritance at 25, the estate was worth upwards of $500 million. The woman Elvis had groomed to be his quiet, obedient companion turned out to be the one who saved his legacy from bankruptcy. And then, in 1985, she did something even more radical. She told the truth. Her memoir, Elvis and Me, became a #1 New York Times bestseller. In it, she described the age gap, the control, the pills, the affairs, and the double standards, with a clarity that stunned Elvis fans worldwide. She wrote about a man who demanded loyalty while offering none, who insisted on purity while surrounding himself with other women, who could fill a stadium with love but couldn't sustain it in his own home. 40 years later, in September 2025, she published a second memoir, Softly As I Leave You. At 80 years old, Priscilla revisited the wounds with even more candor. She wrote about the power imbalance created by their 10-year age gap and how it never went away, even after she became an adult. She described how she chose not to remarry because no man could compete with the hold Elvis still had on her heart. And she acknowledged the most painful paradox of her life, that she didn't leave Elvis because she stopped loving him. She left because staying meant losing herself entirely. In her own words, she was still very much in love with him. She just couldn't live the life. Perhaps that's the real revelation buried inside decades of carefully chosen words and precisely timed admissions. Priscilla Presley didn't expose Elvis to destroy him. She exposed him to survive him. The girl who was shaped into someone else's fantasy spent the rest of her life becoming the woman she was never allowed to be. And the greatest irony of all is that without her, the empire he built would have crumbled into nothing. The king needed saving, and the only person who could do it was the woman he never learned to treat as an equal. What do you think of Priscilla's revelations? Let us know in the comments. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week. And check out the video on your screen for another deep dive you won't want to miss.